Welcome to ConciergeQ Conversations with Chantal Westerman.
Hello, I'm Chantal Westerman, and welcome to ConciergeQ, the online travel magazine where you'll find the best travel information and all you want to know about wherever you're going. And one of the ways we do that is right here with ConciergeQ Conversations. ConciergeQ Conversations are intimate travel portraits with really fascinating people from all around the world, like today's. We like to think of them as, well, local travel experts in the know. Please remember that you can always follow along with us at ConciergeQ.com. And today, we're talking to someone I've wanted to talk to for so long I can't even tell you, so I'm really excited. With 20 albums to his credit, and along with a number of major hits, Woodstock, New York's Michael Frank's gentle songs have topped jazz charts and delighted listeners like me for years, seamlessly weaving lyrics of absolutely stunning sensuality, wit, reflection, and literary eloquence over music that tastefully utilizes top-shelf shadings of jazz, soul, pop, chamber, and music, in fact, from all around the globe. Michael is the songwriter who, for me and for so many people, has set a bar in the music world that places him as nothing less than a statesman of songcraft, if you will. Of course, if you're a fan, you know his best-known works include Popsicle Toes, Monkey See, Monkey Do, The Lady Wants to Know, one of my favorites, When the Cookie Jar is Empty, Tiger in the Rain, Rainy Night in Tokyo. I could just go on. And you all know that it's been covered by artists ranging from Diana Krall and Natalie, Manhattan Transfer, the Carpenters, and that's just a smattering of people who've done that. And if that weren't enough, Michael is the singer who is gifted with a gentle, deliciously expressive voice. And what I love about his voice is it's really identifiable from note one. Today, the Emmy Award-winning composer has released his new CD called Time Together, which is part travelogue, part autobiography, and a little taste of socio-political observation. Love that. From New York to Paris to Africa. So let's just take a listen before we talk to Michael.
Flora, though you sleep on a guru's lap now, all we see everywhere is you. As we recall our time together, lucky is how we felt the day we found you. And we were such a happy three. Oh, how we loved our time together.
Time Together is all about Flora, Michael's adopted dachshund, who was just loved beyond measure. And the royalties go to Hearts United for Animals, which is the rescue organization from which they adopted Flora. Michael, your thoughts on this? You know, I've always thought that, dogs are so much about unconditional love, and they teach us unconditional love because they love us that way. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that's completely true. It certainly was for my wife and me with Flora. We have always been sort of, stay at home, somewhat reclusive, I guess, types. And and just having her, I don't know, she really connected us with people. We used to spend our winters down in Sanibel, Florida, and we would drive down with her every winter when we could. And she we walk her along the beach, and people would come up and say hello, other dachshund owners, but other dog owners or dog lovers, and so she really kind of opened our horizons somewhat to just be more social, I guess, in general. Whenever I would write, Flora would come and she would sit right next to me if I were playing the guitar or the piano. She would sit right next to me, rest her head on one of my feet. And boy, that was hard. It was hard to get over that. She was my, it was like, I called it Rogers and Wienerstein. And she was kind of like my partner for so much of that.
Well, grief's a funny thing. When we grieve for animals, it's also a reminder of how much we love them. So I love that. This is how far back I go with you, Michael. I first fell in love with you in 1977 when the first thing I ever heard you do was Sleeping Gypsy. Mm-hmm. And I played The Lady Wants to Know, Don't Be Blue, Antonio's song, all of them forever. And it occurred to me years and years later that really it was you who set a tone for me in terms of the music that I would love and listen to. And I wonder if you have an awareness of how many people you have really created the landscape of music that they love.
Well, thank you. And thank you for that, glowing intro. I was starting to think, who is this guy when you were talking about me? People say that to me so often that it's always gratifying and humbling, to hear it. But people tell me sometimes they got more interested in jazz. You mentioned The Lady Wants to Know, and people often say they never really listened to Miles Davis or John Coltrane, and because they liked that song, they decided to explore that way and really kind of, opened their ears to a whole other kind of musical landscape. But that is such a, rewarding and gratifying thing to hear. I always love to hear that from people.
Well, you did make it more accessible because I think a lot of people, and I'm so glad you opened the door to Miles and Coltrane, because I think a lot of people didn't like jazz because they didn't get it. They just didn't get the boodly-op, bop, bop, bop kind of jazz.
Right. And
you opened a door and said, what about this kind of jazz? Mm-hmm. So the accessibility that you gave it was huge. I mean, you're really dare I say, I guess I can because our birthdays are so close. You're the grandfather of smooth jazz, ushering in so many other people who created it today. It came in a wave. I mean, there was actually a radio station called The Wave.
Right.
What a gift for you to be able to have done that for so many millions of people, Michael.
Well, thank you. I've certainly been, fortunate and that all my fans have, kept me employed all these years, mm-hmm. and have followed me, and sort of been on the journey, on the musical journey part of it too, which is really amazing. That I meet people at gigs who say, well, it used to be I'd meet them and say, well, my father turned me on to you, and now it's my grandfather turned me on to you. I hope it doesn't get any further than that, but it's just great to meet people after the shows, and everyone has an experience of when they first heard it. Often they tell me that, and very often it is passed down from generation to generation.
Oh yeah, people fell in love to your music. People made children to your music. People got married to your music. I mean, truly, you must hear those stories all the time.
I always say, well, I hope the kids are nice, and I hope they never say, I hate you, Dad, that kind of thing.
One more question about music in general and jazz in general before we talk about your album, which I want to I just want your opinion on this because I have you here in my ear. Miles Davis always used to talk about the idea that he liked untrained musicians, musicians who just created jazz from the heart and from the soul, as opposed to trained musicians. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that can very often be true. I mean, I've never had any musical education, and I have often regretted it. had a lot of education, but not much musical education.
Wow, I wouldn't have known that. That's interesting.
Yeah, and sometimes I've gotten involved in projects where I felt I was maybe because of that in over my head writing music for a couple of movies and a little TV here and there, but there's nothing like having a great copyist and kind of like my musical notation looks very pathetic and very much like grammar school, but I do know enough of the rudimentary elements of music that I can sort of notate what I'm doing. But you always kind of end up hiring a copyist anyway. But I think very often, there are some really, particularly with jazz, probably what Miles was referring to is the things that infused jazz and the roots of jazz really were so kind of folk, if not a capital F, but kind of from just from people playing very handmade instruments in the beginning, and improvising on themes, and that aspect of jazz. I think jazz is always kind of infused with that, and that there was a period when it was Brazilian music that I think was kind of influencing jazz a lot, and then African music, and then East Indian music, and I think jazz is very willing to accept all those sounds and all those rhythms and innovations. Yeah. It's a very kind of eclectic and embracing form.
Yeah, embracing is a perfect word. For Time Together, which I've been listening to, and of course I love, and I really don't mean to go over the top because I'm talking to you, but it's such a great album. It's such a great album. I'd love to hear the story behind One Day in Saint-Tropez.
Well, I went to UCLA as an undergraduate, and I decided, I met some students who had been hitchhiking in Europe, and I decided to, and they said, oh, well, it's great to go in the summer. But I decided to take the spring semester off and connect it to the summer. I went over to Europe and hitchhiked. I saved a little money. This was in my sophomore year, much to my parents' chagrin and fear,
I can imagine.
Yeah, and I just went over with a backpack, and I did take my guitar with me. And everyone was so. This actually happened in 1964. I changed it to 63 because I I needed to rhyme something. But other than that, it was true. Everybody was so kind, and JFK had been assassinated, and the Europeans were very, particularly the Germans and the Italians, were very much, were very fond of JFK, and I remember like seeing his picture in just like in shop windows, like just where you go to, like at the boulangerie or whatever, you'd see like a picture of Jack and Jackie, and with flowers around it. And so it was a time, I guess, when Americans were very sort of, they weren't as much maligned as we can be, in more recent times.
Exactly.
And so everyone was friendly. I hitchhiked all around. And then when I was down in France, I had studied French in school, so I spoke a little bit of French. I got picked up by, Brigitte Bardot. She was driving this beautiful little blue XKE, and I didn't even realize it was her in the beginning.
Oh my goodness!
And all of a sudden she said, "I'm having a party." I was trying to get to Nice and down to the Côte d'Azur, and I think I was pretty fairly close when I got the ride. And she said, "I'm having a party. Come to my house." I said, "Great." Well, when I got there, I realized who it was because there were all these, dignitaries, not dignitaries, but all these actors and and film people, and it was just, it was like I was astonished, happily astonished when I realized where I was and with whom I had been, hitchhiking.
And at that time, she was surely at her most breathtakingly beautiful.
Oh, she was. I mean, she was really so, her whole thing was so overwhelming, like her just to look. And I just saw just like a normal person, like she was driving a car, and I forget where she had come from, but she'd been driving for a while, and she was, very casually put together and
kind of windswept from the car.
Exactly.
And she says to you, "I want you to go to a party with me."
Well, the thing that was so incredible about my experience in Europe that entire time was that people would give you a ride. I mean, I would say probably maybe 25% of the time. People would say, "Well, do you want to come to, what are you doing? Where are you staying?" Well, I was trying to get to another town that had a youth hostel. And I would say, "Well, I'm trying to get to wherever." And if their home was like before you got to wherever, they would say, "Well, if you don't mind sleeping, on the floor, you could stay at my house." So many, that happened so often. People were so friendly and there weren't that many people doing it at that time. There weren't as many. It was still kind of a new thing to be hitchhiking around Europe.
Well, that's reason enough for people to buy this CD, just because people listening to this broadcast, and there are many, to know the story behind One Day in Saint-Tropez. At ConciergeQ, one of the things we do, because we have so many people go to our site, ConciergeQ.com, we always ask our listeners to offer a question. And so we offered them the ability to ask you a question, and we got a great question from one of our listeners named Sheila Shahan in New York City. And she said, "Would you please ask Michael Franks this? On your personal journey, Michael, what do you know now that you didn't know when it began, and what would you do differently if given the chance?"
I mean, there would be like so much. How would you? It would be hard to distill, an answer, considering how much you don't know when until I was like 32 or 31 years old or something when I started. Yeah. So I feel now, in retrospect, that I knew basically nothing. I was very glad that I had, spent time in school, and I was glad that I didn't really I tried to get a job when I got out of, graduate school teaching, and I eventually got a little part-time job at UCLA Extension, but I've always been grateful through my whole, experience for that education, because even though I was happy to segue out of teaching and into music, it was just great to have that background and to know how to teach yourself things. My wife and I are followers of Paramahansa Yogananda, and I remember, at UCLA being, going to the bookstore to buy, something and seeing autobiography of a yogi, and never really, being intrigued by it, but never really picking it up to read. And so many years later, when I actually did read it, I guess I regret I didn't read it sooner, because it's, meditation has certainly helped me and my career also. I've seen so many changes in the music business, and so many people, many friends actually, fall by the wayside, either profoundly or just, business-wise. So,
but of course, he would say that you picked it up at exactly the right time.
Of course, yeah. Yeah, no, that's certainly true. I had done a tour of Australia. This was in 1980, and Claudia, my wife, came with me, and on our way back, we were being flown on Air New Zealand, and on our way back there was an Air New Zealand strike, and it just happened to coincide with when we were changing planes in Auckland, I think, and so we were stuck in Auckland, which was so much fun. I think the strike only lasted 5 days or something, but we had a great time, and we went into a bookstore, and I picked that book up again, and then suddenly, that image, his image on the cover, like totally, penetrated my whole being, and then, but you're right, he would say it was the right time.
Yeah, exactly. Because this is a travel site, of course, you've mentioned flying, and you've flown, so you must have so many air miles, you could go anywhere in the world 4 times a month. What do you do for jet lag, my friend? Is there some secret? I always ask people because I want the secret to jet lag, because, of course, being with ConciergeQ.com, I travel all over the world. So what do you do?
I think exercise really helps. I recently had to scale down my running. I've always done a lot of running, and I had to scale down just because of all the years of damage to my heels and my knees. But I still go to wherever I am. I go immediately to the gym and work out, and like ride the bike or swim or walk on the treadmill or something. And I think exercise really helps.
Yeah, that's a great answer, actually. It really is. And people listening to that appreciate it, because everybody, most everybody I talk to on ConciergeQ struggles with the issues, if you will, of jet lag. So nobody has answered exercise yet, and I think it's important. So let's talk about your Q, which was one of my favorites that has come in. Your favorite word to describe your town, Woodstock, New York. You answered 1969. And what do you mean?
Well, that's when the Woodstock Festival was held. And visitors come here, and they always say, gee, I'd like to go see, where the festival was held. And it's always, they're always disappointed, because I think that was another answer was that, what do you tell them?
It wasn't actually held there, right?
No, the town fathers, when they realized how huge it was going to be, and they backed out of it, when they thought there were going to be 50,000 people instead of 500,000. They just revoked their permit, and that was the end of that. But of course, it was considered the Woodstock Festival, and it was held in the next county, thanks to Max Yasker, I guess his name was, who let his dairy farm be the venue. But that's always just 1969 is like the big year for Woodstock, even though we didn't have to suffer any of the damages of the festival.
What is the most creative, spiritual, or emotional place in Woodstock, New York for you, Michael?
Well, I think it's right where I live. We bought an old farm with some acreage near it, and it was a pretty old farmhouse. It was built in 1791, and it was beautiful. But we lived there for 15 years, and there was not a right angle left in the place, but it was still beautiful. But I mean, I had to wax the windows, to get them open, and it was like, I remember being a surfer. I was growing up as a kid in Southern California, like waxing my surfboard. I actually kept wax by all the windows so I could make sure they were the old, beautiful old glass with air bubbles in it. And, But we decided to build a house. We wanted a smaller house, and we actually built a very, energy-efficient house on an adjoining piece that we had collected at one point, which is a 7.5 acre piece. So we're on a beautiful piece that's got a little lake down at the bottom that's protected kind of in a little preserve, and then we're looking up at the mountain under which the village of Woodstock is kind of nestled, and it's called Mount Overlook. It's beautiful. So I think of this place as the most, spiritual, creative place for me.
Talk about a great place to meditate, huh?
It really is. Mm-hmm. It really is.
Mm-hmm. What's your favorite noise or sound in Woodstock?
Well, I love all the natural sounds. I once wrote a song which I recorded, and which one of my heroes, Peggy Lee, actually recorded, called A Robin Song. And I tried to I don't think they were actually robins, but I was listening to bird song and in the spring, and I think it was a robin and some other bird that I mistakenly combined their melodies. But I actually used those intervals for the melody of the song, and so I just love the sound of birds. I got this great little app from my iPad that's just bird song, and that to me is the greatest, like just a natural sound.
And I love that Peggy Lee did that song, by the way.
Oh, thank you. She was so sweet to me my whole career. I met her very early on. I had just recorded the first record I did at Warner's was called The Art of Tea, and I had just recorded that. And it was several months away from being released, and I just had rough mixes. And this guitarist with whom I was working on the road, getting a band ready to go on the road, John Paisano, great studio player, and had played with Herb Alpert and everybody. He was Peggy's musical director and conductor, and he at one point said, "Would you like to meet Peggy Lee? I played her some of your things, and she really likes them." I said, "Are you kidding?" And so we went up to Peggy's house, and we had dinner with her, and she was so sweet, and she was like humming she was humming a song called Eggplant, like from that. We were listening to this cassette in those days, this rough mix of the tunes from the record. And I started writing to her. She was a really, very great correspondent. She wrote beautiful letters. And
that's neat.
Yeah, and she was so interesting. It was like a because I listened to her as a kid, growing up. Like my parents were big fans, and I listened to her records. So to actually, be in the same room with her was like always such a thrill. But she was so sweet to me the whole time, and sweet to my wife, and we got to see her, very near the end, before she passed, and that was great. And she was just like the sweetest, hippest person. It was great to hear her wax eloquent about her troubles, with Disney and the Disney organization for music that she wrote for Lady and the Tramp. That was like so great. She did a whole thing that was like a Homeric poem. It was like listening to somebody recite the Iliad. It was so great.
Michael, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for taking time to. And you are an absolute joy. You're exactly who you are in your music, and I so appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you.
So will you come back and talk to us again when you're somewhere far, far away in your next album?
Sure, I'd be happy to.
I would love that. So thanks so much for being with us this afternoon at Concierge Q. I love you, and I love your music. And please remember, you can learn even more about Michael Franks and his wonderful inside travel tips for Woodstock, New York. And I mean, you've got to see his Q, folks, because it's really, really great. And of course, you'll find that on ConciergeQ.com. In addition, you can find out more about Michael, including his upcoming concert dates at www.michaelfranks.com. Concierge Q invites you to discover more great programming at everydayopera.com, where, of course, you'll hear this very interview. This is Chantal signing off. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.